I consider it child abuse.
I do too, and that's the part that, look, whether or not this individual that we're talking about, maybe she does have some tiny little shred of credibility, but I'm speaking more in a general sense, and there are all kinds of people who offer opinions with no basis in fact, and when you try to refute them in fact, they're the ones trying to make you look like the dummy or the idiot because you're using logic, common sense, and reason, and obviously that does not apply in today's world. Otherwise, 90% of this stuff would disappear of its own weight, sink underneath the waves of common sense and never to be seen again. Well, I am not someone who wants government to regulate the things we see, read, or hear. Okay? I'm not interested in that under any circumstances. However, there is a downside to it, and that is this kind of nonsense gets put out there in ways we could never have imagined 40 years ago, 20 years ago. It's just open season on insanity. And they go around spreading this garbage, and it's not like I was saying before, if you had this idea, let's say back in 1985, and had to go to a conference and stand before a group of your peers and present evidence to support this case, you'd be laughed right out of the building. They wouldn't. No one would have the courage to do it, and those who do would be painted a fool and driven out of the building. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having to face your peers to support your arguments, and if you can't convince enough people that you actually have a sound case, then guess what? You don't win the conversation. That's what elections are all about. You know, you get one more person to agree with you than disagrees with you, you win. So anyway, for me, that's a big chunk of this story. Never mind the trampling of parental rights. That's the easy, low-hanging stuff. Where are the parents in all this? What if the children change their mind? Let's say a 12-year-old goes on puberty blockers, and by the time she's 16 or 18 has undergone some kind of radical surgery, you can't put her back together again. So who pays for that? Like, when they wake up one morning and go, oh my God, what did I do? Because of the folly of youth, right? Who pays that price? Because the people who are supporting her when she was, I'm using she as an example, could be either way, but when that individual was going through the process, they were all there, man, patting them on the back and say, yes, be brave, be strong, this is great, this is wonderful. But the day they wake up and say, wait a minute, maybe this isn't quite what I signed up for, those people are gone. And there's no support for anybody to learn to come to grips with the mistake they made.
Well, I think it's important to stress at this stage that certainly and I think I'm speaking for you too, Nick, when I say this, is that we don't question that there is such a thing as gender dysphoria. There are people out there who are not comfortable with their bodies, and they're not comfortable with their gender and their sexuality, and so it's a real, for some people, it's a real issue, and I'm prepared to even go so far as to say that for some people it's a very serious issue, but I don't agree that the standard, and not just the standard, but nowadays it seems the exclusive response to this kind of thing is, to give them these hormone blockers and basically just indulge the disposition or the emotional situation. And it's funny because this is the only thing in the medical profession where we actually do indulge the illness or the patient. Take, for instance, some people who feel that they want to have their arm amputated. I mean, that happens. Some people want to have themselves blinded. That actually happens. So why is it that when we're talking about people who, someone who was born a male, who feels very strongly that they shouldn't have a penis or testicles, that we immediately rush to the treatment that we're going to block their hormones so that they don't actually develop over a period of time a masculinity due to the change in their hormones due to puberty, and then we basically castrate these people. We mutilate them because that's how they feel. They want to be. They're not going to call it mutilation, but that's essentially what it is. Or in the case of a young woman having her breasts removed, as was the case with this young lady in England that brought this case to the court. It's beyond me that when people like you or I raise a red flag and say, how come we're not hacking people's arms off, but we're hacking people's penises off? I'm sorry to be so blunt about it. How come we're not hitting the pause button, and how come we're not saying, okay, no, we're not going to do that to you. We're going to treat your illness as it is, an illness, and nobody's denying that gender dysphoria is an illness of one form or another, and we're going to treat it, and we're going to work through this. We're not going to indulge it by mutilating your body. And as I say, Nick, it's the only procedure. It's the only illness where one is not satisfied with, when one believes that there's something wrong with them, that they ought to have been born without legs, for instance, okay? And again, I stress, it sounds strange, but there are people out there like that. When I was doing psychology at university, we met people. I swear, Nick, I met a person who was in an institution who was convinced he was a toaster, and I am not referring to toaster in the Battlestar Galactica sense. Okay, so there are people out there that are like this, and to me, refusing to tackle the problem, refusing to recognize the illness for what it is, a mental illness, an emotional disturbance, and then just simply going right to, physical mutilation or chemical mutilation, if you want to use that term, I think it's absolutely atrocious, and it's a sign of the times. And people like us who raised a red flag, that somehow or other we're being told that we're the intolerant ones, that we're the ones that have no compassion, that we're the ones that don't care. I mean, it's absurd.
Well, I don't think anybody argues that it's a mental illness. I think the problem is, what treatment should we apply? Like, to me, if you think, or if somebody tells you that rearranging your external plumbing is going to fix the problem, then they have as much a problem as you do. And you should be spending time on the bench of a clinical psychologist like Jordan Peterson trying to figure out where these feelings come from, not on the table of a plastic surgeon having the plumbing rearranged. It makes about as much sense as painting a car with a blown engine, expecting the car to run better once the paint is dry. It doesn't work that way. I know that's a very oversimplified way of looking at it, but it also really kind of cuts to the heart of the issue. Look, the problem, our sexuality does not lie below the belt. It lies between our ears. It's a psychological problem. It's not, do I have the right body parts? No, the problem is you have the wrong mental outlook on life, and that's what we need to fix. We need to find out where the wires got crossed, sort that out, and help you get back on your feet again. Not by chopping bits and pieces off or adding parts. It just makes no sense to me at all. And when I hear people, if you take Jenner as an example, that man is really messed up. And I call him a man because that's the way he was born, and all the plastic surgeon, cosmetic surgery isn't going to change that. He is a man, and that's all there is to it. And so is anybody else. They are their original gender, whether they want to admit it or not. And you have to stop enabling this mindset that says you can change that and start giving him a dose of reality and saying, guess what? There's only two genders, and you didn't get a chance to pick which one you were going to be. You have to learn to live with that, not lay on a surgeon's table.
So a little bit of ranting and raving there from both of us, Nick.
Yeah, well, you know what? It's a topic that needs to be ranted about. It's a topic that we need to get a handle on, because this is doing permanent, lifelong harm to children as young as, almost preteens. I'm not comfortable with that.
Well,
and I think it's something that should be ranted and raved about.
And I think it's worth pointing out, Nick, that one of the world leaders in this treatment is actually right here in Canada. It's right in our own backyard. It's CHEO, Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, are world leaders in this treatment. They may not be world leaders yet in terms of numbers, but they are absolutely. And I hesitate to complain because CHEO has done wonderful things for tens of thousands of children now, and including in my own family. So I have a lot of great things to say about CHEO, but this is one of those things that I really have trouble with, and I think that we need to have more publicity about it and a greater public debate about all of this stuff. And you know what else, Nick, in the last couple of minutes here we have left before we go to break, I also think it's important for people out there to understand that when it comes to things like mental illness, okay, and I hear people, talk about, well, are you a doctor? Do you know? The truth is that what is defined as mental illness, okay, it's in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. I can't remember what version they're on now, 5 or 6 or whatever. But to get listed in that as a mental illness is actually, there's a committee that votes on it. So it's actually, to a degree, political. It's not simply a question of, black and white. Did you have cancer? Yes or no? Or, do you have, right now with this pandemic business, do you have COVID-19? Yes or no, whether you have symptoms or not. There are certain things in this in medicine, in fact, possibly most things in medicine, actually in diagnosis, are black and white. They're yes and no. They're binary. But when it comes to mental illness, there are many things that we list as a mental illness that would not have been considered to be a mental illness 25, 30, 50 years ago. There are many things today that are not mental illnesses that 50 years ago would have been considered a mental illness. And there's a committee that meets and they examine this stuff and they debate it and they vote. And it's a majority vote. So there's a lot of politics in mental illness as well. And why is that, Nick? That's because, and this is maybe just my theory, and call me cynical, but that's because we have, in order to get treatment covered by health companies, it helps if you're actually listed as a mental illness. So the more mental illnesses that there are in the DSM, the more that you could get your insurance company to actually pay for treatment for that illness. So, call me cynical, but I think that's a major part of it. Nick, we're going to have to go for a break. It's the bottom of the hour. So if you don't mind, I'm going to just go ahead and say that. We'll be back in a few minutes here on ThinkRadio.ca.